Okay.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the HCA DBHR today as we invite Rutgers, Joni Dulce, to do a presentation today, really, focusing on using success stories, to educate organizations. And in my past, I really use it as a tool to work with my development office to braid funding. But I think it's so important, and a key principle of IPS in terms of supported employment is really educating your internal partners, those other organizations you collaborate with, and really, reinstilling that focus that people can change where they're at, and there's opportunities for growth and recovery through employment. So really excited to see some of the information you put together today, Joni. But thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. It's nice to be here and share some of these success stories that we gathered throughout the last few years doing the call. Also showing some videos that I kind of pulled together, quite a few. We won't show them all today, that also illustrate some success. But as Darren mentioned, using success stories, using people's own kind of narratives of how they used work or how work contributed to their recovery. So we're going to talk a little bit about the important role that work does play in recovery, maybe kind of equip you all with some of that research, some of the ways to dispel some common myths and counter myths that you may encounter when you're working with individuals who might not have a similar belief that work contributes to recovery. So many times when you're providing employment and education services, you may encounter others, other providers, family members, even individuals themselves who may not believe that work is possible and that work can contribute to their recovery. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those myths and how you might counter some of those, and then also describe how to use success stories when you're interacting with job seekers, when you're interacting with other providers. SAMHSA has a tool, a really comprehensive tool that was really useful in preparing today's webinar, but also a useful tool for you to use when you're working with individuals who want to share their story. And it outlines key steps of how to help someone really write their story of recovery or share their story and what they might want to cover, which might be important to the person themselves to kind of rework their narrative into a positive. So help someone look at some of those past challenges and maybe obstacles that they've encountered and kind of rewriting that in a positive way. But it also helps when you are working with others who may not share similar beliefs about the importance of work. So before we get started, what are some of the beliefs around work and recovery? So, or what have you encountered from other providers? Many of you on the call today are vocational providers, employment education providers. When you're working with others, even family members and others in individuals' lives, what are some of the sentiments around recovery and work and the role that work plays? What do you encounter in your work lives? You can unmute to let us know and kind of use the chat. Work is too stressful. Yes, so many times the sentiment might be, oh, work's too stressful. And if someone returns to work, everything else might fall apart in the person's life. What are some other things that maybe providers or families or even the person themselves might say about the role that work plays? Ruby is mentioning, I've heard from family members that they don't think the client can work because of their disabilities. The client's health will be worse. Yes, so kind of that sentiment that work's too stressful, work might contribute to poorer outcomes. Anything else that you've heard throughout your careers when you're working with individuals around employment and education? Darren says concerns about losing SSI checks that the family relies on. So fears about that. Laura, yes, I had said that also. Another about the benefits. Another is that benefits. Yep. So how do you respond when you encounter those types of messages that individuals who are very close to the job seeker's life are sending? What are some of your responses, or what are some ways that you've navigated that or countered those types of sentiments? For example, if someone, as the chat describes, work is too stressful, work is going to make the person worse. In your role as a vocational provider, how do you respond to that?
When I was a employment specialist and job developer, I heard that a lot. It could be from family members, it could be from other staff, and I would just acknowledge it. It is stressful. Sometimes work is stressful for me, but I would always rephrase it back into, I really believe with the population I worked with in a social community organization, is structure is a key part of creating, that platform for stability, and kind of honoring that we all have ideas of things that we'd like to do differently, and look at developing a plan to do that. So kind of acknowledging, and then also have a plan to provide that ongoing stability.
Yes. Yep. Acknowledging that is a fear, that's a valid fear. However, there are supports that are available. The plan can be written to describe how to kind of, work within those constraints and challenges, and how to manage and maybe overcome some of those challenges. Ruby mentions, I tell them to encourage the client to try working. It's risk-free, so the client can stop working anytime they like. So, giving it a try, and kind of that healthy risk, and also balanced with what Darren mentioned, a plan in place, and recognizing that, certainly the supports need to be there and in place for the person to be successful. So we're going to talk a little bit about recovery. And I added a lot of this for us to talk about today, but this is kind of the choir, if you will. So these are all, as vocational providers, you may already be recognizing, understanding, but also I've added these here for you to share with your team members, share with families, share this information and the research. Some common themes in different first-person accounts. So that's kind of what we're talking about today, is really looking at the person's account, like people who are working, what contributed to that. This is sort of just a snapshot of some common themes of recovery and different first-person accounts that Drake and Whitley studied, a while back. But recovery is an process, not an outcome. So you may all know Pat Deegan. Dr. Patricia Deegan is a peer recovery researcher, advocate. So these are just some quotes pulled from there. Recovery is a way of life and attitude, a series of small beginnings with small steps. This is how she defines her recovery. Priscilla Ridgway, Marilyn Copeland, Sherry Mead, all again, recovery theorists and recovery researchers and advocates. So small steps, journeys unique. And more importantly, in our discussion today is this idea and this theme that providers and a system promotes choice and independence. So choices, options, role models, opportunities for bettering one's life are available and discussed. So, when you're working with someone, try to find those role models, those individuals who you can point to or direct the person to challenge some of those myths that the person might have, that I can't work, I'm too sick, or my parents think I'm too sick, or I haven't worked for a number of years, so I can't possibly return. Um, Pointing to some of those role models and peers, and that's kind of where we're at today in our discussion. I just wanted to set it up with this idea that work is beneficial. There are benefits to work, significant part of someone's recovery, all of the advantages of work leading to decrease in symptoms, hospitalizations, and so on, increases in self-esteem, community integration, functioning, housing, and overall quality of life. And these have been studied and researched over the last, few decades regarding employment. So work can lead to these positive outcomes, and sometimes others and the person themselves may not recognize that work has the potential to decrease symptoms and all of these other areas of treatment, and also increases in these other really important areas that help us in our daily life, and improvements in quality of life. So what are some common myths related to mental illness that you might hear from others, even, from people that you're working with, and particularly related to employment and education? What are some myths? So I wanted to talk about this because, again, kind of providing you with resources as employment providers, education providers, to be able to counter some of these myths. And this fact sheet that's linked here, it's a new fact sheet that was developed by SMI Advisor, really comprehensive, has lots of different myths, and certainly ones pertaining to employment. But what are some of the myths that you might hear that are related to employment and someone with a mental health condition? And what are some ways that you address or prevent some of those myths? Deanna writes, they will miss days and may be slow at learning tasks. So think about what are some strategies, Deanna, that you use to dispel that or counter that myth. Or maybe others on the call can chime in as well and talk about.
Well, when I talk to employers, oh wow, my voice. Well, when I talk to employers, I let them know right away that people that are being hired, and I let them know, like, there's a stigma with mental illness. I always, I start off with it. There's a stigma with mental illness, and that's not where we are today. People can work with other people, and they're fast learners, and they're responsible, and they're accountable, and they've met with me on several occasions, before they even go out and start interviewing. So I know personally that they would be ready to go to work.
So you emphasize the fact that you are working with individuals closely to ensure a good job match, that you're working with the person to make sure that their skills and their interests kind of line up. Absolutely. It looks like in the chat here, Laura's writing, the Hollywood perspective on mental illness increases stigma. The stigma creates challenges for people with mental health conditions. I research and help explain the condition. Absolutely. Darren, you need to be symptom-free before going back to work, or abstinence or substance-free is another myth.
Or what I would do is I just ask them, look, you can find out for yourself. Just give me the interview. That's all I ask, is the interview.
So,
you can give me the interview. I said, you will see what I'm talking about. And
right. I love that. I love that perspective. And that's, again, the relationship that you're building with employers allows you to have that discussion. Ruby writes, the employer will not hire because of client's mental health and a not so great background. So it might be those types of myths and think about ways that you would counter those myths. Laura writes, I like, give me the interview statement. I want to use that. Yes. So thank you, Deanna. Laura is planning to use that. So
this is Darren. I just wanted to
Okay.
add, sometimes it's normalizing things. Not all employers actually want to know more specifics, but when, question about that, I would try to normalize it to maybe a medical condition. Definitely, I've worked with people with seizure disorders, which could be far more risk factor in a work environment than I would think, depression, anxiety, some of the, other diagnosis, or, use a comparison, to diabetes, so that, people need ongoing support. They need to check it, and they need medications for stability. I've also worked with people that could be very life-threatening in itself, not being able to manage that correctly. So I tried to normalize it, for those folks who wanted, when you have that dialogue and they're interested more about the services that we do. I always found it helpful that always have something prepared, for those employers who are curious, or maybe there's services at your organization that they could use for the benefit of their organization. I always kind of had that as a really high level of engagement when people say, maybe, I have employees that could use domestic service violence or something like that, or anger management, or, whatever those other support services might be.
thank you, Darren. I think that's a perfect way to describe and normalize. Many people have encountered, folks in their lives who might be on medications or have other types of physical concerns or medical, and to normalize that, I think is a smart way to go about that relationship building. And again, this is where we get into, I have a lot of videos here. We're not going to look at all of them. Dr. Pat Deegan has a video, 3 minutes and 15 seconds about her recovery. And she emphasizes in this that sometimes people need something to organize their recovery around. And for many people, that something is work. I'm not going to share this one today. I have some other newer ones. This is an oldie but a goodie, still resonates and still kind of hits home and helps people to understand that people still have dreams and hopes. And Dr. Deegan talks about the time that she was in a kind of like a boarding home situation, and her dreams and her recovery plan started there. And the 3-minute video really nicely illustrates that. So this is, you'll have the video for use in your organization, but I did want to share 2 kind of newer videos. And as we're looking through those, we're going to look at Melissa and Ryan, 2 individuals through On Track New York, which is a first episode psychosis coordinated specialty care program. And as we're going through these, first, I want you to think about how these might be used in your program, how you can use these types of messages, these types of first person accounts when you're working with individuals who might, be still feeling that work contributes to stress and holding people back, if you will, from resuming employment or considering employment. So think about that first and foremost, how you might be able to incorporate this into your own work. And these talking points can be incorporated into your work too. But for today's purpose, think about these areas. What impacted you most from the video as we're going through them? What emotion or feeling does this video generate in you? How is this person's message relevant to you? And what were some specific ways that work promoted recovery for the individuals that we're going to look at? So first, we're going to look at Melissa. So think about those questions. If you want to look at them again. So what impacted you most? We'll come back to these after we view it. What emotion does it generate in you? How's this person relevant? or this message relevant to you, and what are some specific ways that work promoted recovery for Melissa and then Ryan. So why don't we look at Melissa's. Let's see. You know, it always takes a minute or two to get these up. Oops. Okay. And I'm going to start sharing now. Okay, Darren, you can see the prompt for the video. Again, these are from On Track New York, Voices of Recovery. You have the link in your presentation. There are several. If you click on this box here, Voices of Recovery, there are several different ones. We're just going to look at 2 today. Darren, if you could, okay, good. Okay, so and just when we start playing it, think about those questions and how you might use it in your own work. And then Darren, if you could just give me a thumbs up that you can hear the sound correctly, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I'm a peer in recovery. I have suffered with paranoia and I've heard voices. Right now I'm in recovery for a few years and I'm doing very well. I have a full-time job that I really enjoy, and I also have a bachelor's degree. When I was first hospitalized, I was only 18 years old, so that was the summer that I was going into college. So basically, it took me a couple of years to graduate college. It took me a longer time because I had symptoms and side effects with the medicine. But I did it and I didn't give up, and eventually I graduated. In the beginning, I thought the stress of working full-time would be too much because I had been working part-time for so many years. You know, for me, it wasn't easy to go full-time because I wasn't a morning person. It was difficult for me to get up in the morning. But eventually I did it for so long and I didn't give up that for me, I can do it now. And there's something called the Americans with Disabilities Act that you can get reasonable accommodations for your impairments, basically, and you shouldn't give up on that goal. I have trouble sometimes waking up in the morning, so I asked for an accommodation to come in later, but I would have to stay later. And I didn't do it that often, but on some days when it was really hard for me to get out of bed, I would have that. Every day when I get up to go to work, I don't only get up to earn a paycheck, I also go to help people, basically. And even if there's some days where I'm not really feeling too well, and if somebody has like a need that's very pressing, I'll go in anyway and help them. I think the practitioners are wrong to tell their patients not to work because it's too stressful, because there's so many benefits that come to working. First of all, a monetary benefit is the first one. And second of all, people learn to adjust and get better when they have a routine. If you have a desire to go to college and to go to work, you should complete that goal.
So thinking about those questions, what impacted you about this video? What impacted you about her story? Let me just get back to her. Any thoughts? Okay, looks like we have something in the chat. The hope, yes. Ruby, it took longer to achieve her goals, but she didn't give up. Yes. How about how might you use something like this when you're working with individuals in your program? How might you use these types of videos when you're working with people? What would be the advantages? What would be some of the benefits of sharing her story with others? You can use the chat or unmute your mic. Oh, representation mitigates stigma. Absolutely, Christina. I think that's Deanna being able to talk to employers to accommodate her in the morning because she has a hard time waking up. Yeah, so sending that message to people that you're working with that, that there are strategies and ways to accommodate some of the challenges or concerns the person might have. Laura, there are clients that would benefit from this type of inspiration because at times I think clients are not sure if they can accomplish the goals. Yes. So kind of thinking about how you might incorporate that into your own work. So the message or emotion, the feeling that people talked about is one of hope. Thinking about when you're meeting with someone, asking how is this person's message relevant to them? So let's look at Ryan's. And again, I tried to choose some that were, definitely work related. The voices of recovery that you'll see if you click into the site using the links here, but also the bottom on Melissa's is the link to the entire group of recordings. They're not just work related. They're all aspects of someone's recovery, whether it's working, going to school, living in the community, hanging out, socializing. So lots of different opportunities for you to find one that matches kind of when you're, when you're working with someone, matches what that person's interests are. So let's check out Ryan's, and we're going to look at that in a similar way. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm 34 years old. I work full-time as a civil rights advocate for individuals with mental health disabilities in a state psychiatric hospital. I recently graduated with a master's degree. I happen to drive a nice automobile. I'm single, enjoy dating, and I'm also in recovery from a form of schizophrenia. And today I'd like to talk to you about how I returned to school. This is the picture of me when I showed up on the first day of classes to have my student ID taken. I was overweight, disheveled, poorly groomed, and the thing that strikes me most about these pictures, in my eyes, I can feel what it was like back then. I can see the hopelessness, sort of despair, in the picture. I definitely wasn't happy. On many days, I sort of wished that life would just go away, that I were dead. It was too painful. One of my main fears was that I would never be able to work. This process of going back to school is futile, being a person with, a major mental disorder, to actually go through this process of going back to school. But I made the decision that I was going to go and study what I wanted to study and pursue my own education, actually, to pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake, despite the fact that I believed that I couldn't work. In the midst of that 7 years that I was in college, I was hospitalized at my most ill moment. I had teachers that were very supportive and allowed me to make up the work. And I was able to take incompletes for those semesters. The support of my family, friends, and my professors was enough when I was hospitalized to allow me to believe that that wasn't the end of the road. The stress of school never put me in the hospital. I'd say the stress of believing I couldn't achieve at school because I'm a person with a mental illness probably was more stressing to me than the stress of finals and final papers and things like that. You know, I didn't think I was able to work, and so I didn't. It was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. After I finished my bachelor's degree, I worked successfully for a year before I started a master's program, and I actually completed the master's program in 2.5 years, which was the standard time as opposed to the extra length it took for me to finish the bachelor's degree. And I worked full-time and went to school full-time at the master's level and completed that in a timely fashion. From my experience, I guess I'd encourage anyone to go back to school who's thinking about it. It's such a crucial aspect of my recovery that I think education can be an arena where anyone can sort of discover who they are, discover what they're passionate about. And I'd say, like, through the process of education, we sort of become more ourselves by learning what we're able to do. I guess I didn't know who or what I could be until I started learning exactly what I could do in the world and then doing it.
So let's look at the questions again. So when you think about Ryan and his story, what impacted you most about this video? What emotion, feeling did it generate? Darren?
Yeah, for me, it was just him having the picture and reflecting back on who he was and the insight, you know, that he had. For me, that was really touching because I think that could be such a powerful point of anybody's story, how they saw themselves at one point and then how they see themselves now, and so much incredible change has taken place. So that is very touching, you know, to hear that.
Anyone else? Yeah, I agree, kind of using that as a way to convey that message that you didn't give up. Laura, wow. So Ryan reminded me of one of my clients. The client said, working will make me feel better about myself. Absolutely encouraging. Yes. So, you know, a lot of times people, like Ryan mentioned, are in this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not going to ever be able to go back to school. It's futile. And he was able to kind of make those steps and take those steps that he needed to take. And again, if you're working with someone who is really ambivalent and not sure of themselves and really debating whether or not this is even something that they can do, sharing these types of messages of hope and inspiration. And maybe I should have asked that right from the very beginning about how many of you use these types of personal stories when you're working with someone like Ryan, who might be just kind of giving up on himself and not believing that anything would be possible, let alone going back to school. He disclosed that he experienced symptoms related to schizophrenia. So he may have heard some of the myths and beliefs around that mental health condition. Darren's writing, he did talk about his support network facing the barriers of hospitalization. He was successful at returning to school, those natural supports, absolutely. So, you know, he mentioned a lot of key parts that contributed to his recovery in that very brief narrative. Are there opportunities in your work to use some of these types of videos and stories that you're working with? And also, as a follow-up to that, are there opportunities for you to work with individuals who are participating in your program who may have gone back to work or may have gone back to school to try to get some of these messages from them to share with others who you might be working with?
when the PowerPoint comes out, I'm going to share that link with my network to go to that site. I think that these are so empowering and great information to share with anybody, because it gets to the core of what we do, changing people's lives. Just like that gentleman had, hospitalizations. I've worked with people and then trying to get them back to where they were. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's not, but having that, support network and connect with folks. So I really love that last story. So thank you for sharing that, Joni.
And then Sean's story here kind of illustrates the importance of creating a career profile and getting to know the individual participating in service, and how that knowledge of the person really kind of translated into a really good job match. So again, I just added a lot of these for you to use when you're working with individuals. We may not go over them all today. Eleanor Longden is a TED Talk, kind of, again, talks about her recovery from schizophrenia and some of the symptoms she experienced. Ellen Sachs, I don't know if anyone is familiar with Ellen Sachs, but she also talks, does a TED Talk. I think hers is, they're both, normal TED Talk amounts of time, maybe 11 to 20 minutes, but again, talks about her recovery. And each of these stories relate to employment or education, and how employment and education helped promote recovery. So I certainly know that there are lots of stories out there and narratives, but these directly relate to employment and the role that work and school plays. Here's another viewpoint. It's not a recording, but it is a story on African-American stories of oppression, survival, and recovery in mental health systems. So it's another viewpoint, and it's from In Our Own Voice. So again, I'm just adding some of these to expand your repository of tools that you can use when people have that belief that Ryan had, or families or others. And these are, I thought, Dawn and Darren and I were talking about over the last several months, years that we've been working together. We always ask, what are some successes? What are some challenges? So I sometimes, write those down or have them in the chat. So I pulled several together. There were so many, but these next few pages, again, are successes that you all in Washington have had with working with individuals and returning to work or school. So I added these again as places where you can, if you're working with someone and they're stuck, you're working with other teammates and they're, not really recognizing the important role that work plays, these successes can be kind of pulled up. None of them have anyone's names attached or identifying information, but, they may even look familiar to some of you. So, people talked about people, being able to place individuals in a job, and they've been working for the last year. The person starts today, or they hadn't, who had not been working. Oh, maybe that should have said who had not been working, but working on elevator speech, or being able to share those, placing individuals, developing relationships with employers, placing a participant in a job that they were very interested in, completed a video resume, and the resume got over 5,000 hits so far. So lots of these successes, placing 2 people in the last month, help with clothing, identified 2 new employers, helping an architect find a job, prepared for an interview. So a lot of these successes that you all have had, again, just to kind of use as opportunities when you're working with people to say there are successes. We do have, we've helped people, and these are some of the ways that in the past we've been able to help individuals. So kind of those sharing of stories, looking at work and school. this is the guide that I was telling you about, and it's through SAMHSA, and the link is here, and we're going to go through some of the specific steps, but again, equipping you with some skills and some areas that you might be able to help someone that you're working with share their story. And perhaps you might be able to develop a lot of these stories if people in your services or that you know are interested, and you might be able to use these stories when you're talking with others, talking with staff, families. The Share Your Story guide here is more of a digital way of a how-to for digital storytelling. However, you can certainly modify that. It doesn't have to be a recording. It could be, just written down on paper, but we'll look at the guide in detail. But before we get to it, they kind of start the guide off with this question about thinking about a time when someone's story helped you. How did it help? What made the story useful or memorable? So maybe that's a good place for us to start here as we're kind of getting into this more, developing these success stories, sharing these success stories, how to even develop these stories, thinking about a time when someone's story helped you. So think about that. When was a time that someone's story helped you? How did it help, and what made the story useful or memorable? So in your own lives, have there been times when someone's story helped you achieve a goal or achieve something or think about something in a different way? I know for me, when I was thinking about going back to school, I didn't think I would be able to, get a good score on the GREs. And hearing someone that I really thought very fondly of talk about, how they were able to still attend, school, and maybe their GREs weren't the greatest. But they also had some other skills and some other useful experiences that were even more important to the school. So kind of knowing that wasn't like an all or nothing type of need, having to have the best score, that there were other ways to still go back to school and flourish in an education environment. So think about a time when someone's story helped you. And if you'd like to share, you can use the chat or unmute your mic.
Hi, Joni. This is Dawn.
Hi, Dawn.
I started a master's program when I was 61 years old. And part of the reason that I did that was that a colleague that worked at WorkSource talked about that, also worked out at community college in Moses Lake, talked about a couple of individuals, one who was in his, I think, 70s when he finished college, and one that was even older. And I thought, age is not relevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, but it felt that way at one point in time. So that story helped me to recognize that at 61, yes, I could get my master's degree. Sadly, I didn't, just because I got this job and I no longer had a pool of folks to do a practicum with. So I have half a master's degree.
But no, I think that's the kind of what we're getting at here, and hearing that other people, regardless of age, were able to do it. I think my story is similar to yours too, Dawn, with the age
Mm-hmm.
and returning to school. So I hear you, and that was, you brought up, some additional memories for me, and all of those stories that I told myself, oh, you're too old, you can't go back. But then hearing some other people and seeing others do it was particularly helpful. Any other? Something here in the chat.
Well, folks are thinking, I was just going to say some of the people in my classes and my instructor I actually overheard my instructor and somebody talking about me and my age, and I was able to do some stigma busting.
Yes.
So that was another thing. I was encouraged by what others had to say, and I was able to confront the stigma that's related to age and going back to school
Yes.
in a couple of circumstances.
Yep, you were kind of equipped with that information to dispel some of those myths. I love it. Laura writes, my husband started later in life to obtain his master's. He then encouraged me to do the same, and I was empowered by his strengths. Yes, so stories have helped us along our lives. And things that about it may have been more or less memorable, but they are useful tools that help us consider something that maybe we didn't think we were capable of or couldn't do because of a certain, like Dawn mentions, our age, or for me, not doing well on standardized tests and knowing that was a big thing. So when we're going to look a little bit about kind of how you can help someone or even yourself develop recovery stories. And this is, again, like kind of a very, very quick overview. And I'll share kind of the website where this material is from. And they provide lots of guidance, lots of tools, lots of kind of worksheets that you can write in. But these are kind of like an overview of this different steps. So thinking about an idea, what is it that you would like for your, I just want to follow up with Dawn right here before we move on. I heard my instructor and another student talk about how people over the age of 60 are feeble. That's hilarious. That's completely inaccurate. And also awful that they would say that in front of others and even have that thought. So good thing you dispelled that myth. Step one, developing an idea. So think about, what would be the idea? Does the person want to, kind of like Ryan, emphasize that they were in this kind of bad spot mentally and believing that they could do it, and how they were able to, how the person kind of moved beyond that? Is the idea to generate interest in a certain, recovery goal, whatever that idea might be, help the person develop it. And the guide has like really good questions to really generate some of this idea thinking. Step two, developing a plan and a purpose. So, why are you telling this story? What impact might your story have on other people? What do you want to achieve by telling this story? Who's the audience? Who must you reach to achieve your goals? Do you want to make sure, people who are living with certain mental health conditions hear your message? Also kind of think about your own permission. So step back and ask yourself, you're ready to share your story. Consider the disclosure benefits and drawbacks of sharing your story. What do you need to complete this project, or story? So thinking about these different steps and stages, and how might you in your programs develop different stories that touch on different areas, work, school, kind of have your own internal success stories that you might be using. And then step three, kind of outlining and creating a script. So some thoughts about that is what's unique about your story of recovery. What are the most important points to tell in just a few minutes? So really thinking about what are those important parts? How would you outline it? And I do want to, this just kind of touches on some of those areas. But I would like us to go into the document so I can kind of show you how beautifully it's laid out, how user-friendly it is, and talk a little bit before we hang up about ways that you might use this in your implementation of maybe tools along these lines. How can you use this in your work? So let me just get to that. tool. So as we're kind of moving to look at the document itself, what are some ways that you might be able to use something along these lines to help individuals in your programs and services share their own stories? What would be some of the benefits? What would be some of the uses that you see? So here's the guide. And it's, again, pretty detailed and in-depth, but it goes through how to develop the idea, the planning, creating the outline or script, and then it goes into more of the recording pieces and publishing it. So it's just really a fun use of this really important element of minimizing and dispelling some of those myths, dispelling, as it mentions here, and reducing negative attitudes, encouraging others to consider employment, consider education, and then the benefits for the person could be empowering and healing experience for them. So what are some ways that you feel you might be able to use something along these lines in your organizations and specifically in your programs?
Yeah, this is Darren here at the HCA. Donna and I are really working with FCS providers and all providers we work with to think about developing that and sharing that with us, because it can be really impactful as we share information with our legislator to maintain funding for sustainability of our supportive employment services here in Washington. So we send out notices out in our FCS newsletter, but we're always asking folks to develop this. So I think this is a great guideline. Thank you for putting all that information together, Joni, and some of the video interviews. I think those are really powerful. So that might be something we can work on in the next fiscal year. Crossing my fingers.
Yeah, that'd be great. And again, they have throughout the entire workbook here different opportunities for you to fill in and answer some questions and really think about how you might use these stories and how what some of the benefits of creating those stories might be. So I think we'll wrap up and just ask if there are any questions before we move into our summary.
I just want to thank you for your time and putting this great information together, and everybody who was here today during the presentation. I hope it gives some useful tools to take back and share with the rest of your team to kind of look at ways this could be an integral part of any community provider to really educate internal and external stakeholders for that.
And then before we do, and we in our institute here at Rutgers, we created a little tip sheet, kind of a 1.5 page tip sheet infographic on creating interest and how to create interest, engage job seekers, engage others, kind of goes through some different areas that might be useful to kind of encourage people to consider employment and education as goals, and maybe even pass along to providers that you're working with to encourage. So you can check out that.
There's like Dora's box of goodies today, Joni.
So yeah, so it's that's available. I think today was meant to kind of just provide some resources, give you all some tools in your toolbox to be able to dispel some of those myths, encourage people to consider employment and education, and also work with families, other providers to also have them on board with encouraging employment and education and helping to dispel some of their fears. So some of the references that we talked about, and as always, please contact me if you have questions or need some additional information. And I think we are at the end. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And yes, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation. And the nice thing about working with Rutgers is that we'll be able to have the recording and then look at uploading that on the HCA YouTube site as well for future reference.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will chat later next month.
Next month.
30 days. Please
We're like
get in touch
clockwork.
yeah, I know. Get in touch with Darren and Dawn about any topics that you'd like to see. We're always open and interested to hear what your thoughts are and what would be important for you. So thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Joni.
Thank you, Darren. Enjoy your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.